We'll go for the agenda. Apologies for absence. Thank you. Decorations of interest, everyone. That's a student business, no? Yeah. He's not on it. Decorations of interest. No one, thank you. Move on to minutes. Minutes of the last meeting. Do we agree the correct record? Thank you. We move on to the applications now. We start the whole with 4A, which is Coleman Road, and I'll ask Marla to take us through the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually 4B, this application.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, item 4B is for 90 to 92 Coleman Road. The application is for the installation of a new shop front and a kitchen extraction flue. If we go to the next slide, this is the site plan, and the next slide shows an aerial view, which has, you can see Coleman Road running down the right-hand side there, and there's a little offshoot from Coleman Road, which has a parade of shops on it. The premises is towards the north of that end of shops. To the rear, you've got North Park Avenue, North Park Drive, sorry, which serves a strip of garages and some dwellings that are accessed off a little footpath along that road. Go to the next slide. This is the existing shop front. It's two shops historically, but has been combined in the past. The application involves the installation of a new shop front, which sort of brings these two together. Next slide. And this is a view of the whole parade of shops. You can see there's a variety of uses down there, and the parade is used for car parking for those shops. And this is a view in the other direction. This is the opposite side of the road. So you've got Coleman Road, which forms part of the outer ring road between the site and the dwellings on the opposite side of the road. Next slide. That's another view of the same. Next slide. So this is the rear of the parade of shops. So you can see that they've all got a single story, a large single story extension coming off the back of each of those shops. And there are flats above. The flue is proposed to come out the top of one of those single story extensions. Next slide. That's just another view of the same. This is the opposite side of North Park Drive. So you've got some garages here, and this is directly opposite the site. And the next photo shows the rest of that strip. So as you can see, that there is some separation, some significant separation between the location of the proposed flue and any dwellings, because you can't even see them in this shot. They are beyond those garages. This is the floor plan, which shows the existing and proposed layout of the premises. On the right hand side, you can see that the unit is laid out with a significant area designated to dining space. There are also two rooms towards the back of the premises, which are labelled as masjids. I'll come on to that in a minute. This plan here shows the proposed shop fronts. So you can see that it's formerly been two separate shop fronts, although it's been combined. They looked quite separate. The proposal aims to bring those together and have one front door. and some signage above, which might need advert consent. This plan here shows the proposed flue. So there's a section through the building. You can see it exits at the very rear of the single-storey extension, so away from the flats above. I think that's it. That's everything. So just to note that we've got objections to this scheme, which was mainly related to the change of use. As set out in the committee reports, we don't have control over this change of use because the existing and the proposed uses both fall within use class E. There's a change last year which meant that we no longer have control over retail to restaurant changes of use. There is some element of takeaway being proposed here, but from discussions with the agent, it appears that the primary use is as a dine-in restaurant with ancillary takeaway, and the plans support that, such a significant amount of indoor dining space. We've had one letter of representation which raises the same points that have previously been raised, and just a correction to the report as well, which is that one of the objections noted that these two small rooms at the back are labelled as masjids. In this context, they're prayer rooms, presumably for the use of Muslims who are visiting the restaurant and need to pray during their visit. It's clear that the vast majority of the floor space here is designated to dining space, so the presence of those two rooms does not suggest to us that the change, the proposed use is anything other than a restaurant. If there were to be any significant change of use in the future, a change of use application or enforcement action may become necessary. The recommendation is to approve the application for the shop front and for the extraction flue.
Thank you very much for that. We're going to speakers on this item. We'll straight on to questions. Councillor Lovett.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry, sorry, please. That was some years ago, wasn't it? Thank you, Chair. In the report, we've got main issues, principle of development being one of them. If you are telling us that we have no influence over change of use, then what are we deciding over the principle of development? That's one question. The second question is, I note that there's very few conditions attached to this application. I would have thought that there would have been conditions surrounding the times of opening and also perhaps some consideration about littering, but you know, and a few others, but they're not there. Delivery vehicles was one I thought of, yes. Just one other issue, that under 4, paragraph 4, it says there is a residential chalet bungalow to the rear of the parade. Well, if you look at the plan, there is one chalet bungalow right on the corner of North Park Avenue, where it's got a 1, but there are other bungalows. There's 1, 3, 5, and 7 behind on North Park Avenue, and there's also 1, 2, and 3 on North Park Drive. So it's you know, it's a bit misleading just to say there's one residential chalet bungalow to the rear of the parade. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, your point, your final point there is noted. There are clearly more than one. I think the point there was that there's one that's sort of immediately abuts the that road, and the others are set further back. But yes, your point is noted. With regards to the principle of development, I think that section was included just to make clear the situation with regards to the change of use, because so many of the objections referred to it. You're right that we can't really consider the principle of development, but it was just to make clear what the situation is with regards to the change of use. Similarly, because for instance, delivery times or litter or opening hours would all relate to that change of use and which we don't have control over. We can't apply conditions which relate to it. We can only apply conditions that relate to the shop front or to the extraction flue.
Councillor.
Can I just come back? So this could be a 24-hour restaurant and we just don't have any control over that.
Yeah.
Just to pick up on that, I mean, that is an unfortunate result of the change to national legislation, and that we no longer have the control over the change of use. I mean, I asked Laura to include it in the report specifically for that reason, to make it clear that we as a planning authority no longer have control over that. Had we had control, then we would have had to consider a lot of other issues, such as the impact upon the vitality of the local centre. But we don't have control over those things anymore, so we can't.
Thank you, Councillor.
I've got a really minor question relating to the shop front. So red is going to be single glazed. Is that something people could? I mean, I don't understand why it shouldn't be a double glazed shop front. Is there anything we can do to try and convince them that single glazed is really a thing of the past?
Is it?
I think it is single glazed, yes. Yeah, fair point. It seems strange, but that's their choice and not necessarily something we can control in this instance. But yes.
Okay, any more questions to the planning officer? Councillor Thomas.
No question. The flu was adhered to the regulations of the safety and inspection tax.
Yeah, so the application has been reviewed by our colleagues in environmental protection. The applicant has been required to submit details regarding noise and odour, etc. And it sort of satisfies all of those points with, and the distance between the flue and residential properties has been taken into account.
So just to come back to the specific point about building regs, they will have to submit, if it's covered by building regs, they'll have to submit a separate application for that. And we haven't assessed whether it's actually compliant with building regulations as part of the planning application. That'll be for them to sort out separately.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to discussions, but before we do that, I'll move to recommendations to approve. And I'll move that with seconded. Councillor Button, thank you. Discussion, anyone? Councillor Lovely. And Councillor Stewart.
I am councillor for this ward, and it's hugely disappointing to think that this is going to be the 6th takeaway restaurant in a parade of 10 shops, 10 properties. There is already littering there. There's about, I think, just 2 litter bins that are fairly small and quite inadequate, and they don't get emptied frequently enough. So this will add to the litter problem. We're very concerned about the odour, and but you know, what about the visual impact that this will have? And it is just so frustrating that we have no control over the hours of opening. This could be open till 12 midnight, whereas other takeaways would be closed before that time, because they presumably had the permission before the new legislation came in. So this could be open till midnight. There are very little places to park cars, and if it's a restaurant with 80 seats, covers, where can you park those cars? And the disturbance that comes from people coming and going at those late hours, it's just hugely disappointing. And I mean, I'm saying this, I know I can't make any difference, but it does need to be brought to people's attention what new legislation this government is introducing, the impact that has on people's lives. And it is just hugely frustrating. Local people know what it's like, and we have no opportunity. I mean, a lot of people have spoken to me about it, but didn't want to come along because they said, what is the point? What is the point? And one has to say, what is the point? could we appeal to the applicant to provide perhaps a bin of their own and take the rubbish in at the end of the day and dispose of it? I mean, we've got other premises along there. I mean, Greg's have I shouldn't say that, but Greg's have a bin outside and it's always overflowing and they seem to take no responsibility for that. So, you know, if he wants to be a good owner of the property and proprietor of the business, perhaps he could see it's very clear to having a bin there and helping the litter problem at least.
That's true. Oh, David.
The applicant is in the room, so he'll have heard the concerns expressed by members. We can put an informative advising the applicant of the committee's concerns, but as I say, unfortunately, we can't enforce that.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to start with a question that's only just arisen from the previous speaker, and that is, can we condition the venue to do a litter pick at close?
No, that doesn't relate to the application that you're considering. You're only considering the shop front and the blue.
Yeah, okay, we'll wait for that clarification. Yeah. I agree with Councillor Lubbock on some of these issues. It is frustrating that we don't have the means to condition, and as a result of that, there's no reason to refuse this application. But there is some comfort, I think, for people in the area, because I believe that if they wish to open and serve refreshments after 11 o'clock in the evening, they will need a licence for that, a late night refreshment licence. So those conditions could potentially come through a different department.
Okay, any more discussion? No, we'll straight, Councillor again.
Just ask if that is correct, that if they are operating
Yes,
after 11, then they will need a licence, whether it's an eating restaurant as well as a takeaway.
I believe so. You've got chair license sitting there and you just said it. So
yes, they will need a licence for late night refreshments after 11 o'clock. It doesn't sound like there'll be an alcohol licence here, but late night refreshments, I understand, unless I've got a completely wrong licence.
Well, that's some small comfort. Thank you.
okay, thank you for that. We'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour, please show.
Please keep your hands up until I've called your names. Councillor Stookley, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Button, Councillor Champion, Councillor Graham, Councillor Giles, Councillor Bogle, Councillor Everett, Councillor Peake, and Councillor Maxwell, and Councillor Driver.
Okay, those against? Abstentions? Thank you.
Abstentions is Councillor Butler.
That's been agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura, for that.
Thank you. The people attending for this item, if you just go and speak, if you come out that door and just, our colleagues are sitting outside, they'll escort you out. Oh, online. Did you make my agenda?
No. Do you want one?
I had one on my desk. Somebody borrowed it. I'll take it. This one?
No, keep it on.
Somebody took mine. That's right. It's nothing. But if we get to the vote.
Well, we're moving on to 4C. We're just waiting for the planning officer to log in and get ready. That's a bit of a hold up to the course was regulations. This is for 4C, One Furley Road, and if I ask Marie to take us through the recommendations and the plans when she's ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this presentation covers two different applications. They're two applications which follow different processes under different parts of the planning regulations. The first application proposes a change of use
from offices to residential to create 8 apartments on the upper floors of the existing building at 1 Ferry Road. This is a change of use which benefits from community development rights. It only requires a light touch prior approval application to consider whether approval is required and can be given to a limited range of impacts. These are set out at paragraph 39 of your report and are transport and highway impacts, contamination risks, flooding risks, noise from commercial premises, and the provision of adequate natural light to habitable rooms. In determining this prior approval application, it must be considered whether approval of these matters can be granted when considered with regard to the National Planning Policy Framework. In these ways, this is different to a normal planning application. The second application covered by the presentation is, however, a full planning application. This proposes extensions and external alterations to create additional residential and commercial floor space, and that's in conjunction with the change of use covered by the prior approval application, and also includes 1 additional storey to be built comprised of 2 residential apartments. So the 2 applications follow different processes that are interrelated to create 1 comprehensive development. Looking at the location plan here, the application site is outlined in red. It sits at the eastern end of Ferry Road, which is a short cul-de-sac off Riverside Road, and Rosary Road exists to the east and is on much higher ground, and the development is set into a slope between the 2 roads. It is a locally listed building which sits within the St Matthew's Conservation Area. To the north, west and east, there are residential terraces. Those to the east, which can be seen on the plan there, you'll see directly opposite the site, there's a terrace of 4 dwellings. Incorrectly in the report, that was referred to as 3 dwellings, but there are 4 properties there. Immediately to the south of that, you'll see an open area off Rosary Road. That's an area of communal open space associated with the housing development of Bertram Way, and you'll see part of that is directly opposite the application site. To the south of the application site, you'll see a building with a larger footprint. That's another locally listed building which is in office use. And these 2 buildings are 2 of the larger buildings within this part of the conservation area, which is otherwise dominated by a more tightly knit residential development. This is the existing site plan, just showing the footprint of the building. There's a car park to the front on the western side, and an external staircase runs along the southern boundary of the site. And there's a stair tower and a pedestrian bridge which spans the access over to Rosary Road. Looking at the existing floor plans, this is a 4-storey building all in office use. On level 0 there is the ground floor, and you'll see that that has a reduced floor space compared to the first floor, which is where the building set into the site. On the first floor, on the left-hand side of the floor plan there, you'll see there are some smaller rooms and uses, toilets and other small office spaces which have windows on the north elevation. Moving on to the second and third floors, you'll see these cover a much smaller footprint, not extending over the full footprint of the first floor, set back on both the west and southern sides. This is the existing west elevation of the building. It's a locally listed building which was designed by Fielding and Mawson architects in the 1960s. They have subsequently occupied it and continue to do so to the present day. It's proposed they would still continue to occupy the building going forward. The architecture of the building is characterised by the bands of brickwork and glazing around it, and the stair tower and chimney to the side are also distinctive features. This is the east elevation, which is what you see from Rosary Road, and you'll note that the change in ground levels here means that only the very top of the building can be seen from this aspect. And then moving around to the north elevation, this is the elevation which faces a terrace of neighbouring dwellings on Lollards Road. You'll see there's some existing windows here, and you can also see where the top 2 floors are set back from the west elevation. And then moving round to the existing south elevation, you can see that those distinctive bands of glazing and brickwork extend around to this side as well. This is the proposed site plan. So a car park would be retained to the front of the building and provide 10 residential spaces, one for each of the dwellings which are proposed, and 2 spaces would be retained for office use with a cycle store for 10 cycles. There would be additional cycle storage up at the first floor level, which would be accessed by the existing external stair, and a channel or other device would be provided to facilitate easier access to that first floor level. In-store for residents is also proposed on the Rosary Road frontage, and that would be accessed by a new dropped curb provided. This is the proposed ground floor plan. This is where office use would be retained within the building, and as I mentioned, the intention is that Fielding and Mawson architects would continue to occupy this space. There would be some minor changes to extend the footprint to facilitate retention of this use and provide independent access from the remaining residential use within the rest of the building. Up on the first floor, that would largely remain as existing in terms of its extent and be converted to provide 3 flats, 2 to the front and 1 to the rear. The one at the rear would have a small outdoor patio area adjacent to the 2 separate residential and office cycle stores. On the second floor, this would be extended to the front and side. It would also provide 3 flats. The 2 to the front would each enjoy a roof terrace on the west elevation. On the third floor, again, this would be extended in the same way as the second floor. It would provide 2 flats on this level, and each would have a roof terrace on the west elevation. And then it's proposed to extend the building upwards in order to provide a new 4th floor. This would provide 2 further flats, and again, they would both enjoy roof terraces on the west elevation, and that new story would cover the extended 2nd and 3rd floors in the same footprint. This image shows the areas in red where the building is proposed to be extended beyond its existing mass. So you can see there's a modest extension to the ground floor, which would remain under the extent of the existing 1st floor. Then the 2nd and 3rd floors would be extended out to the front and the side, and then an additional story would be provided on top. The increase in height is 2.6 metres, which isn't the full height of an additional story, because other internal alterations would provide the additional floor to ceiling height. So although one additional story is proposed, the building wouldn't increase in height to the same extent as a standard story. It's only 2.6 metres, the increase. And this is the proposed west elevation. So you can see where those roof terraces would be provided across here. And there are proposed changes to the fenestration and cladding. The existing brickwork would largely be covered with a copper textured and aged cladding, which would have a horizontal emphasis. The ground floor and top floor would have contrasting and complementary areas of darker metal cladding with a more vertical emphasis to provide some interest. On the east elevation here, again, this is the elevation facing towards Rosary Road. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see there's a dashed line in red, which shows the height of the existing building. So you can see the relative increase in height here. And on this elevation, 2 bedrooms, one on the top floor and one on the 4th floor would have, so 3rd floor would have Juliet balconies. You can also see here that the existing chimney is proposed to be removed, and the building would be extended across with a solid and partly glazed extension to the existing stair tower, which would be retained. The brickwork to the stair tower would be retained as existing, and there'd be a small extension to the top of that, no higher than the rest of the building. And on the left-hand side there should be a line showing the height of the existing chimney, and you can see that the proposed increase in height would be no higher than the height of the existing chimney, which you'll see on some of the following photos. This is a section through the site showing a proposed development. On the left-hand side, you can see the neighbouring dwellings fronting Riverside Road, which sit on lower ground, and the relationship of the proposed development with those. And on the right-hand side, you can see the outline of the terrace of dwellings immediately opposite the site, and further dwellings within the next development beyond that. You can see that the existing building, and as it extended, would retain a gap between the building and the road, and you can see the distance to the neighbouring dwellings on the section there. This is the proposed south elevation, which would be clad and altered in similar ways to the other elevations. The office on the ground floor would have an access lobby at this point, and then the dwellings would be accessed from a new communal lobby on the first floor. And this is the proposed north elevation, which is the elevation that faces the neighbouring terrace of dwellings on Lollards Road. It has a number of windows, but these have been reduced since the application was first submitted, and some of the windows have been altered to high-level windows, which would offer light in but no direct views out. Bathroom windows on this elevation would also be obscure glaze. There has also been an amendment since the application was first submitted, so that the top two floor roof terraces, which extend to the side, the return walls of those would be provided with a largely solid or slightly transparent screen to filter views to the side. On the section plan here, you can see a section through the site showing the neighbouring office building on the right-hand side, and then the relationship of the proposed development with the neighbouring dwellings at Lollards Road on the left-hand side. You'll see that they sit on slightly lower ground than the application site, which to some extent increases the perception and height of the building. And on this drawing, again, you've got a red dashed line that shows the height of the existing building. So you can see the increase in height that would result from the development and the relationship that that has with the back of those neighbouring dwellings. Moving on to photos of the site now. This is a view standing on Riverside Road, looking directly up Ferry Road, which you can see slopes up towards the application building. On the left-hand side, there are neighbouring dwellings, which are locally listed that front Riverside Road. And on the right-hand side, there's a former mansion house, which is locally listed. That's in use as offices and has been extended to the rear. Moving in towards the site, here you can see the existing car park at the front of the building. You can see those distinctive bands of brickwork and glazing across this west elevation, and how this first floor hangs over the ground floor, and then the top two floors are set much further back. And to the side, you can also see the chimney and stair tower and the external staircase that runs up the southern boundary. Then walking round to Rosary Road and looking back across in the direction of Riverside Road, you can see the application building on the left-hand side. You can see there are some trees there which are outside the application site within the gardens of neighbouring dwellings. Directly in front of you, you can see the rear of the dwellings on Riverside Road, which have some gardens across there. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the rear elevation of the neighbouring dwellings on Lollards Road, which have a number of windows across the rear elevation and gardens which extend up to the application site. And in the background, you can see a lovely view of the cathedral in the skyline. And this is one of the number of views that you get from this elevated position on Rosary Road, looking across towards the cathedral. They're an important contribution to local immunity and the character of the conservation area here. Standing in a similar position and just turning around to the side, here you can see the north elevation of the building more clearly. And again, the trees in front of that and the relationship that the neighbouring dwellings on Lollards Road have with that from their rear windows and also rear gardens. And this is standing in a similar position, but when those trees are in full leaf. This is a photo which has been submitted by a neighbour, and it's the view from a garden within that terrace on Lollards Road. This was taken earlier in the year before the trees were in leaf and when the sun was relatively low in the sky, and you can see the brightness of the sun just above the building there. And this is a photo from another neighbour from a different property, which has a view of the north elevation and west elevations there. Then returning back to Rosary Road and taking a wider view of the site, here you can see the stair tower and chimney. And as I said, on the elevations, the proposed increase in height would be no higher than that existing chimney. Then standing directly opposite the stair tower and chimney, you'll see there's another view of the cathedral here. This is a glimpsed view when you only really get it if you stand directly opposite it and stand stationary to enjoy it, while moving along the road or standing at any other angle in relation to the stair tower, chimney and building. The angle is such that you don't get direct view. And then looking at the building on the left-hand side there in relation to the neighbouring dwellings across Rosary Road on the right, there's that terrace of 4 properties which are directly opposite the site, and then the development at the Nest, which is slightly further north. Now, in terms of assessment, as is set out in the report, the submitted details in respect of the 5 matters which can be considered in relation to the change of use to residential over the top 3 floors of the offices are all considered to be acceptable, and it is recommended that prior approval of these is granted. That assessment is dependent on the works proposed in the full application being approved and implemented, so a condition is recommended to require compliance prior to occupation, and that would link these 2 applications in implementation. The works which are proposed to alter and extend the building and provide the 2 additional flats have raised objections concerned about the impact on amenity on neighbouring occupiers. It is recognised that the alterations to the scale, appearance and use of the building would affect neighbouring occupiers in this tight unit area at the edge of the city centre. The increased height and mass would result in some additional overshadowing, however not to any extent which is considered so significant as to cause unacceptable harm to residential amenity, nor would any additional overlooking or disturbance result in unacceptable harm. This is particularly the case when regard is had to the context of the site and the existing impacts the building has. The proposal is considered to benefit the amenity of the area by providing more activity on the site and more surveillance, which should help to deter antisocial behaviour on and around the site. The proposal for this locally listed building in the conservation area is considered to be of a high design quality, which would represent a new phase in the building's life. It would facilitate the retention of some office accommodation, along with the provision of 10 new dwellings, which would offer a high standard of amenity to future occupiers. This is considered to be both an appropriate and effective use of land in this highly sustainable location. Conditions are recommended in the report to mitigate any unacceptable impacts on amenity, transportation and ecology, and the planning application is therefore also recommended for approval.
Thank you for that. We have got 3 speakers, and the first one is Robert Rickard. And you have 3 minutes, I believe. 3 minutes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And you need to bring the microphone up and then push up the first button, the green one. Your way.
Is that okay? My name is Robert Rickard, and I'm informally reporting the views of householders numbers 9 and 10, 11 and 12 Bertram Way, and in consultation with those at 33 to 39 Rosary residents, the buildings opposite, as the photos show, the colleague mentioned. My family and I live at number 10. Householders on the whole had no substantial objection to the change of use or refurbishment. We're grateful to Julian, the developer, for additional conversations some time ago. However, as other objections note, the additional 5th floor brings its windows higher than and robs daylight from 33 to 39 Rosary Road dwellings. The proposed 5th floor is higher than any other dwelling or business in the whole district and seems to conflict with the stepped skyline principle following every other development on the riverside, Rosary Road, Bertram Way, Telegraph Hill Terraces, i.e. above and below. A few of us wondered about the cladding adding to the aesthetic of the building, wondered whether the rather attractive red brickwork could be cleaned instead. More importantly, perhaps, some of us felt strongly that the lack of any social housing seemed inappropriate in a socially aware city, especially post-pandemic, given the antisocial use that homeless people make of the site. The fifth floor extension is the prime example of this and diminishes the substantial views from what is locally known as Bertram Way, with a small park immediately south of 39 Rosary Road, used by many who live in the 100+ housing association of other flats and houses on Bertram Way. It really is quite a big site, and a lot of people live there. Most of them have no open space at all, no balcony area, and really enjoy use of that park, which enjoys that view over towards the city. Finally, the other reason Bertram Green is there is to commemorate the Nest, the former home of Norwich City Football Club. A surprising number of football pilgrims visit the site, which includes a sculpture explicitly making reference to the connection between the city and the Nest by two long crow bars topped by a crow football, forming an inverted V, referencing the cathedral spire, the view of which will be partially obscured by the fifth floor as proposed. Overall, the view of households locally is that the Ferry Road development has obvious merit, but perhaps the commercial interest might perhaps be outweighing the community benefits, especially in respect of the currently proposed fifth floor extension.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Sherry Kingsley, and you have 3 minutes as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm also in all of the committee report, I'd like to raise 4 aspects. Firstly, terrace privacy and overlooking paragraphs 18, 78 and 79. The north elevation of the terrace will be more solid and higher rather than glass, but why are these solid to prevent overlooking? The only view is into adjacent homes due to the roof line height. As north facing, light gain to benefit the new terraces would be low. Also, has the extra height been applied to the second floor terrace at north elevation? Elevation of CGI plans show this to be about 5 feet, so easy to look over. Solid screening and additional height will also benefit the privacy of the new occupancy. Thirdly, while some north elevation windows have been removed or made smaller, bedrooms and living areas retain full height windows. Why can't the north side windows be reduced in size or raised in sill height? The daylight report states they're comfortably above the legal requirements, and all the living rooms also have terrace doors full height to the west. External lighting and maps, paragraphs 31, 97 and recommendations 2 and 7. This states external lighting must be an ecologist's recommendations. As the applicant's email comment at 30th April 5A1, control lighting says terrace lights will be adjustable by residents. How can this be guaranteed to be compliant long term? The replacement map use is recommended for the same location as one already discovered, the north corner of the west elevation. The side of the terrace lights will be. Could terrace lighting not be removed entirely and instead light come from the internal living areas? Loss of light, paragraph 70 to 75. Paragraph 74 states south-facing Lollards Road properties already experience some overshadowing during part of the year, specifically from the building. Photos from late February sent to the planning officer with comments in April show this explicitly to not be the case. In November to February, when the sun is lowest but no leaf cover is there, the sun is visible above the building. Paragraph 74 says an upward extension will impinge on this to more than a 25-degree line. And finally, low nutrient green roof. Paragraph 102 says the representation suggested a green roof. The ecological survey report also recommended this, particularly with only 9% of the green space on site and water runoff reduction benefits. The application notes the site slopes. Riverside Road floods repeatedly every year, overloaded from adjoining roads. Standing water from block drains as well affects traffic, pedestrians and cyclists and often extends the full width of the road. Water efficiency is already a consideration for recommendation 212. Why not include this too, along with the other positive sustainability features? Norwich Station area proposal was approved in Transport Committee in June with investigating flood mitigation.
We need to wind up now, I'm afraid.
Following comments received, this is an opportunity to join that thinking. Thank you.
Very much. We also have the agent here. Doing the works. Thank you. You have 3 minutes as well. Thank you. Oh, you have 6 minutes.
I need 3, I think.
Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julian Wells, and I'm the Director of FW Properties. We are a local developer based here in Norwich and have recently celebrated our 10th year in business. To date, we have completed numerous developments across Norfolk and in Norwich City Centre, including Westgate Tower and Tivernham House in Thorpe Road. In essence, we are an out-and-out developer of new homes and commercial space. We are very familiar with One Ferry Road, having worked on many projects over the years with Fielden and Mawson architects, who have occupied the building since it was developed in 1970. Fielden and Mawson approached us to help them explore options for this building, which has become very out of date and desperately in need of a major overhaul. They also no longer require the amount of floor space, so we're contemplating moving away from this building and from the city centre altogether. The building has simply come to the end of its economic life as offices. Its walls and roof are now leaking, the original steel windows are starting to rust and break, the plant and internal finishes need full replacement, and the inadequate insulation falls way short of modern day requirements. It therefore requires considerable investment, so much so that the change of use to residential, together with the additional floor space being created, are needed to make this refurbishment project viable. Importantly, the additional floor space will be within the footprint of the existing building and will be no higher than the existing chimney on the site, which has been removed as part of these proposals. The topography of the site helps to minimise the effects of the new space on neighbouring properties. Not only will these proposals provide this 50-year-old building with a major lease of life, and it should look fantastic externally, but will also keep Fielden and Mawson in part of their original home within the city centre. With the additional activity generated by the offices and residential occupiers, this should also help to address the antisocial behaviour which frequently occurs around this building and on this part of Rosary Road. On the Westgate and Tivernham House refurbishment projects, it shows that the sustainable approach of utilising the structure of existing buildings can be used when injecting new life into older city centre buildings like One Ferry Road without the need for total redevelopment. We will also significantly improve the environmental performance of the building too. We have secured all of the funding for this venture and have a contractor lined up to progress the construction works. So in the event that the planning consent is granted today, then we're aiming to start on site with this project during the next few months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Marie, do you want to come back? Any questions asked? Obviously, we'll straight on to questions from councillors.
Sorry, can you say a little bit about what one of the speakers mentioned, social housing? Say a little bit about that.
So in terms of social housing and affordable housing, the National Planning Policy Framework only allows local planning authorities to require the provision of affordable housing on schemes of 10 or more dwellings. Now, these two applications in combination would provide a total of 10 dwellings on the site. However, because of the way in which the proposal has been made across these two different applications and the fact that the existing office floor space can be converted to residential under the permitted development rights with any prior approval, then the 8 dwellings that would be created using that application route cannot be considered, and because of the limited range of considerations that can be taken into account in the determination of that application, affordable housing isn't one of them. So it's not possible as a planning authority to require the provision of affordable housing on this development.
Can I just come back on another point? There's two applications before you here. One is, as Maria's already said, full planning, which is for the physical alterations shown in red on the slide that's on the screen at the moment, plus the provision of the two flats, of the flats on the upper floor that provides. And with that one, you have relatively free rein in terms of the issues that you can look at. But in terms of the application for prior approval for the conversion of the larger part of the building, our consideration as a local planning authority is limited to the 5 factors that Maria mentioned. Just some of the issues that the speakers and the objectors have raised are, for example, about the impact of these windows upon the privacy afforded to these gardens. Unfortunately, the application for prior approval for the conversion doesn't allow us to take that into consideration. You can take into consideration the impact of these additional flats in terms of the privacy on the neighbours, but not the ones that could be provided through the prior approval. You can only consider transport and highways impacts of that, contamination risks on the site, flooding risks, the impacts upon the upon the proposed residents from commercial premises, and the provision of adequate natural light in all to habitable route of the proposed development. So your consideration of the prior approval application is much narrower than it would be if it was subject to a planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Looking forward to questions on that. Members, Councillor and Councillor Chen.
Could you, I've got 2 questions for now. Could you explain with regards to the top windows to the side, which I guess would also be the biggest concern in terms of privacy and overlooking, what weight you've given to and how you know what the argument is in terms of trying to reduce overlooking and increase privacy and the relevance for light. So that's my first question. My second question is in terms of the frontage. Can you explain, because there were concerns about the cladding and the material. Can you just, it's a locally listed building, can you just explain how that fits into with trying to preserve the character of this locally listed building?
So in terms of the 3 top floor windows, which you can see on the north elevation on the drawing there, they would be to a kitchen and living area within one apartment. That apartment also has a roof terrace to the front, which enjoys the much larger opening that would provide more light and better views, or more attractive views, perhaps towards the cathedral and the river. And you can also see from that plan, David, there are many roof lights provided to that as well. So it would be a well-lit apartment with those additional windows to the side to provide additional light. But the main outlook, certainly in terms of attractiveness and the space that we enjoy, would be the opening to the roof terrace. There is a balance to be struck between providing adequate outlook and natural light to new dwellings, while balancing that against the impact it may have on the amenity of existing neighbouring occupiers. In this case, we consider that the balance is acceptable. It would result in unacceptable harm to neighbouring occupiers, and the proposed dwellings would provide a high standard of amenity for the occupiers there. On the second question of the cladding, there are...
Before you move on, does that answer the question, or was it more about the impact from overlooking from those windows?
Yeah, that's a bit smart. Yes, it was more about why it wasn't considered that this should be reduced further or obscured further, so there is a reduction in overlooking to those properties on the side.
So they have been reduced from the original proposal. There's also a utility room on that elevation, which previously had a window, and you can see that the one towards the front, the right-hand side, is a high level window, so that would just be for light, there wouldn't be any direct view there. So the amendments which were made from the original proposal to this proposal that you can see on the screen were considered adequate to reduce the overlooking area.
How many of those windows obscure lights?
No, because they're to the living space rather than bathrooms.
And the second question.
So the second question about the cladding, yes, this is a locally listed building and the existing brickwork is something which is mentioned in the local list description and a distinctive feature of it. Through the extensions and alterations that would be made, this is a scheme which would change the appearance of the locally listed building. We consider that it would do so in a high quality design that would represent an evolution in the life of the building and bring it into the 21st century, moving it on from the very distinctive 60s architecture it has at the moment. It would be a significant change, and the cladding is part of that, but the colour and texture of the copper cladding that's proposed and the fact that it's shown to have a horizontal emphasis has reference back to some of the features of the existing brickwork which is considered appropriate, and the finer details of that material that proposed to be used are recommended to be agreed by condition. Conditions 3 on the planning permission is recommended that all the external materials are agreed, so we would look at that in detail to ensure that it is an appropriately high quality material for a locally listed building in a conservation area, and that it does successfully achieve the intention of representing this new, more contemporary period within the life of an old building.
And if I may, I've got a very, very brief final question. On page 84 of the report, there is the north elevation. I've just never seen, I just don't know what to make out of those red. I've just never seen that in a drawing before. So you can see the trees, and what are the red drawings which look like clouds around it? What's that?
That's just to identify where the amendments were made from the previous drawing. So if you put the two drawings side by side, it highlights where that.
Thank you, Councillor Chang.
Hello. So I was very interested, or have been very interested in the green roof idea. I think the flooding, that if you've got localized runoff that's creating a flooding issue anyway, and there's reference to being a sustainable build, I'm a little bit, and this idea that it's bringing it into the 21st century, if it was really a 21st century build, I don't understand why it doesn't have a green roof, solar panels. A second question would be pertaining to the bats. I believe that the bats are already roosting in the building itself. Is that being adequately addressed? I was not entirely sure from reading. And also with relation to bird boxes and local vegetation, the hedgehogs, and the suggestion would be to include swift boxes or swift bricks into the development would get a big seal of approval from my direction. So there are some points which I felt were pertinent.
Thank you. No sort of question here, was a little more of a comment.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
I'm quite interested. So my question is, would the developer consider putting in a green roof? Would the developer consider putting in solar panels? Can we ask the developer to do that?
No. We can ask him to do it, but we can't ask him here if he can do it. We can say this and
I have had some discussions with the applicant about those matters. As one of the speakers mentioned, it has been recommended in a recommendation, in one of the representations, sorry, and in the ecology report that was first submitted that a green roof might be appropriate here. In terms of the mitigation that would offer to surface water drainage, The development itself isn't increasing the impermeable area on the site, so the development wouldn't increase surface water runoff or exacerbate any existing problems, and it's not within a specific area, the site itself, which is identified as having surface water flooding risk. So it's not a requirement because there's no additional increase, but it is something which has been considered, but not included in the application. Must be considered on the basis it's been submitted. In terms of the other matters, solar panels, yes, the question has been asked whether this development can incorporate some renewable energy provision. The developer has taken the approach of the fabric first approach, so increasing the thermal performance and energy efficiency of the fabric of the building rather than offering additional renewable technologies. Again, because of the scale of the application, because of the limited range of matters that we can consider as part of the prior approval, it's not something that we can require, but the developer is committed to increasing the efficiency and performance of the fabric of the building itself through the conversion. In terms of bats, a bat survey or several bat surveys were undertaken, which found one individual common pipistrelle bat using the roofs on the west elevation. There are mitigation measures proposed to address that, which are acceptable. They include the requirements for a licence to undertake works to ensure that bats are not present and then excluded from the building before any works take place. And then condition 8 of the recommendation for the planning application is that enhancements are agreed, and that should include at least one replacement bat roosting feature, as well as bird boxes and enhancements to the soft landscaping on site that will be agreed through the landscaping scheme suggested in condition 7. So there are measures there to provide replacement and enhanced biodiversity measures as part of the development.
Thank you. Any more questions from any members? Councillor Charles.
Thank you. For the prior development application, with regards to taking into account the provision of adequate natural light, is that only in relation to the new dwellings or is? Thank you very much. That clarifies.
Thank you. There's no more questions. Councillor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to take up the point of surface water. If there is currently a problem, we'd like to think this new build would improve that situation. The condition under 12, which is water efficiency, am I right in thinking that is just merely sort of the flushing of toilets? So it doesn't contain anything about grey water or any way of mitigation of that of rainwater. It just all goes down the drain. It is that's slightly it's very disappointing because if we've heard that there's already an issue of surface water, then it could quite easily be dealt. Some of it might be dealt with by adding certain things to this building.
Thank you. Just want to come back on the point that Councillor Hubbard made about if there's an existing problem, this application should improve it. We can only ask the developer to consider elements of mitigation where the proposal makes it worse. We can't ask the developer to actually make an existing problem better. So that would be unfair. The issue here is that in terms of surface water flooding, the proposed building doesn't increase the hard surface area. And therefore wouldn't increase the runoff. So it doesn't actually make the situation worse. So whilst the green roof might have other functions from a biodiversity point of view, to include it on the basis of surface water wouldn't be reasonable, I'm afraid.
If not a green roof, then sort of just huge areas of planters or something that actually takes the rainwater away. It just seems an opportunity lost when we know there's a problem and we can't do anything to help.
I'm sorry that you can't do that. You can't ask a developer to make an existing situation better. You can only ask them to mitigate the impact they have. Sorry.
And did you show the landscape that was going to be improved and plants and stuff like that?
If David could just go back to the proposed site plan, it showed there's very limited space within the site. Yeah, that's the one. So at the moment, you've got the hard surface car park to the front, which is going to be retained. That is at capacity in terms of the car parking and cycle parking that's proposed in that area. On the opposite side of the building, there's a very steep bank which is vegetated at the moment. The intention of the landscape scheme proposed is to improve the planting of that to enhance biodiversity interest, but it's an existing permeable area where surface water can be absorbed and infiltrated, so that would be retained, and as I say, the intention is to improve the planting of that to enhance biodiversity interest, but there are no other areas of the site that would be available to provide additional soft landscape.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to discussions. Have you got a question, Councillor?
I have a question and a discussion point, so shall I do both?
Or do you want to do that discussion?
Question.
Just a question first.
We're on question rather
Yeah.
than discussion.
Well, a lot of my questions have already been asked, but one that hasn't is whether a consideration was given to setting the storage slightly back from the edge of the building to reduce the overlooking effect.
If David could perhaps go to the massing drawing again, the top floors are set back, and that's important in a number of ways. One, to retain part of the character of the existing building where the top floors are set back, and this stepped roofscape which you do get along the valley side, along Riverside Road within the conservation area, and also to help reduce the impact on neighbouring properties. The impact is perhaps appears a bit greater on that plan where David's got the arrow at the moment, where you've got the screen to the side of the terraces. Originally that was proposed to be open, which made the appearance of that top floor smaller, but it was required, or it was considered necessary, that there was some more solid screen provided there for privacy. The intention is that that would have some sort of transparency, so would help reduce the appearance of the mass. And the other ways in which that top floor has been designed to the front and the other side break up the overall mass of it. And that's the proposal that has been presented. It's considered acceptable in terms of both design and the impact on neighbouring amenity, and that's the proposal to be determined.
I think the point was actually whether or not this, Councillor Grant, I think the point was had consideration been given to setting this back to that point?
Yes.
Right. I think we have to assess the application as presented to us, and I think the assessment that we've done concludes that the impact of what we presented with it is acceptable. I don't know whether there was any consideration, but we've assessed what we're presented with, and the conclusion is that it's acceptable.
Thank you. We'll move on to discussions now. Before we do, I'll move the recommendation. The recommendation is to approve. I'll move that. Secondly, Councillor Button. Thank you. Discussions. Councillor Burgoyne and Councillor Graham.
So I don't see a material consideration to vote against this, but I think overall I agree that it is disappointing. It could be, because this could be fantastic. This could be really modern and taking it to the next step. And I think we've given the developer a lot of ideas of what we would ideally like to see. You can't tell them to do it, but it's something you think therefore I think that would make it a more attractive building to live in as well. I would also hope that as a local developer and with an attractive development like this, you could scope out the possibility to provide some sort of affordable housing within it as well. So even though, you know, because of the split application, we can't make you do it, you know, I would still hope that could be within the scope of the development. So I think there's a lot that could be further improved, but overall, you know, there's nothing material enough for me to vote against.
Councillor
I know that the developer has had some conversations with residents and also set his great store by being a developer that builds up to a standard rather than down to a price. And some great points have been made for improvements, and although we can't require them, we can ask for anything and hope that the great suggestions that have been made might actually happen, even though we can't require them. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have similar empathy with the points made by the speakers today, and but I think on balance, the issues raised are either mitigated or don't carry enough weight to vote against. I am disappointed to see that an architect with a website with a section on sustainability isn't considering a green roof and solar panels. Surely they will pay for themselves in more ways than one. Where an architect occupies the building, I would highly recommend it.
Councillor.
Yes, just going back to the water system, will there be a grey water system where they harvest the rainwater for use in the building itself for toilets and such like? I mean, that's pretty basic in a building that's being brought into the 21st century with sustainability credentials. So, I mean, water is a really precious commodity, and we're still building, you know, without any opportunity for there to be proper use of the water and letting it just sort of drain away and I think and using water that's had to be treated. If it's not a problem now, it certainly will be in the future, and we just shouldn't be building new build without grey water use. And I just hope it's in there.
Thank you. No other members wishing to speak. Councillor Thomas.
As architects in relation to sustainability, this is an opportunity to excel, go beyond building regulations. In terms of sustainability, we do need to go beyond that. And one of the greatest challenges is retrofitting existing buildings. So this is retrofitting as a development, retrofitting an existing building. And given we've got arguments on the ground floor, I think there is a missed opportunity to adhere to what we need to adhere to, and there's any reason beyond why we shouldn't approve it. But I would like to see more. Help do that, but in terms of retrofitting existing buildings as architects, address sustainability and efficiency in the building. So, it's almost like to see that.
Thank you. No other councillors wishing to speak with respect to the bill. All those in favour of the development, please show.
That's recorded, folks. I'll call out names, and if you put your hands down, I'll call you. Bear with me too, it's a bit awkward all over the place. Councillor Stootley, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Button, Councillor Champion, Councillor Bowline, Councillor Giles, Councillor Everett, Councillor Peake, Councillor Maxwell, and Councillor Brown.
All those against, please show. No one. 2 abstentions. Thank you.
Abstentions of Councillors Lubbock and Councillor Gray.
Recommendation has been approved. Thank you. I suggest we've got another long item coming up next. So I suggest that we have a 10-minute break for people who want to.
Chair, 4 minutes ago, I imagine that our guests for this item would like to leave now, and the ones for very, yeah. So if they'd like to leave
Come back, and we carry on now, and then move on to item 4D, Hanover Road and garages. And Marie, if you could take us through that report as well, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a planning application proposing the demolition of garages and erection of 4 new dwellings on land at the rear of properties on Hanover Road. Just to alert members' attention to your updates report, where it's identified that an amended red line plan was submitted after the report was published. The purpose of the red line is to show the extent of the application site. The amendment which has been made omits the route of the footpath from the application site through to Newmarket Road in the eastern corner of the site. There are no works, no development is proposed on that route, and it's not within the applicant's ownership, so it was correct for it to be omitted from that red line. It's not considered that anybody interested in the application is prejudiced by that amendment, nor does it change the assessment of the proposal. So the site itself contains a block of 12 garages and is a surface car park with capacity for approximately 29 cars. They have been available to permit zone S holders previously, although it has partly been fenced off within the last year, and the garages are all vacant. This is one of a number of council sites which formed a programme where the council worked in partnership with registered providers to redevelop land for affordable housing. This forms part of that programme. The land has now transferred to Orwell Housing Association. There are a number of dwellings around the site which back onto it, including terrace along Hanover Road, bungalows at Hanover Court, and properties along Newmarket Road, as well as the return of Hanover Road on the southwestern boundaries. The site is just outside the Newmarket Road conservation area. The neighbouring terrace along Newmarket Road is locally listed, as is the doctor's surgery, which is just the other side of the footpath. So the proposal is to demolish the existing garage block and redevelop the site with 4 new dwellings. They would consist of a pair of 1-bedroom bungalows in the northeast corner of the site. Each would have their own garden, shed and refuse storage, and 1 car parking space each. There would also be a 2-storey building towards the south, which would be comprised of 2 flats, 1 on each floor and each with 1 bedroom. They would also have their own private garden spaces with sheds for cycle storage and refuse storage, and 1 car parking space. Being new dwellings within a permit parking zone, the occupiers of those 4 dwellings would not be eligible for parking permits, but would each have their own dedicated space as part of the development. The proposal also makes provision for 9 additional parking spaces, which would remain available for permit holders within Zone S. This is a scheme which is identical to one that was previously permitted in 2018. That permission recently expired in May of this year after implementation of it was delayed by COVID lockdowns and other complications with the transfer of land and contracting the development. The approval of that previous scheme is a significant material consideration in the determination of this one. The only additional information that's been submitted with this application, which differs from the previous scheme, is full details of materials, landscaping and construction methods have been submitted, and they address matters that were required by condition on the previous permission. Those details have been submitted with a view to facilitating a prompt start should this application be approved. The landscaping details include the provision of permeable paving for parking spaces, rainwater butts for roof drainage and soft landscaping, and in total that would reduce the impermeable area across the site from 100% at the moment to 56%, reducing the burden on surface water drainage.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers.
In terms of the proposals and the floor plans and elevations, they're on the screen there. At the top, you can see the 2 1-bedroom flats and the proposed elevations. If flats and bungalows would all be built in red brick with red hand tiles. We've got the one-bedroom bungalows towards the bottom of the plan. All 4 dwellings would comply with minimum internal space standards and are proposed to be offered for affordable rent. Looking at photos of the site, this is a view standing just inside the entrance, the vehicular entrance into the site from Hanover Road. On the left-hand side is one of the neighbouring dwellings which fronts Hanover Road and has a rear garden extending to the side here. And on the right-hand side, you can see 2 parked cars and the existing garage block. Beyond that, in the distance, you can just see the hipped roof of one of the neighbouring bungalows within Hanover Court. And beyond that, flats on Brunswick Road. Turning round, this is the existing block of 12 garages that's proposed to be demolished, and this is the area of the site where the 2-storey building of 2 flats is proposed. In the distance, you can see the rear of properties on Newmarket Road. That's the terrace that's locally listed, and one of those dwellings has been extended since consideration of the previous application. Moving through, you can see that part of the parking area within the site has been fenced off. This was done by the applicant last summer in anticipation of development commencing. However, as I say, there were delays and that wasn't possible. You can also see the doctor surgery, which is the red brick and rendered building there, one side of the footpath, and then a continuation of that terrace of neighbouring dwellings on Newmarket Road on the other side. And looking in the other direction, it's looking towards the northeast corner of the site, the corner where the 2 bungalows are proposed. And beyond the brick wall there, you can see neighbouring bungalows in Hanover Court, and to the other side, the rear of properties on Hanover Road. And the final view is just from that footpath, looking into the site, with a neighbouring dwelling on one side and the doctor's surgery and its car park on the other. So in terms of assessment, I will just draw members' attention to the updates report, as there have been some additional representations received which largely reiterate previous comments. One additional comment was received in the last or overnight, which identified that this week there have been works undertaken to unblock an existing surface water drain done by Anglian Water. It is noted that the development will reduce the impermeable area of the site and therefore reduce the surface water that goes to this drain and would not exacerbate any existing problems. As is set out in the report, the previous permission for identical scheme to this is a significant material consideration in the determination of this application. One change in circumstances since that decision is that a car park on Beaumont Place has become available to Zone S permit holders. In the report, that is stated to have 22 spaces and therefore mitigate the loss of spaces within this zone as a result of the development and weigh in favour of the proposal. It has since been clarified that there are in fact only 9 spaces available in this car park, which reduces the mitigation that it offers to the development. However, it does remain an additional material consideration to those considered in the assessment of the 2018 application, and it is one which continues to weigh in favour of the proposal, albeit to a lesser extent. There have been no other substantial changes to other material considerations since the previous approval. It is appreciated that there continues to be local concern about the loss of parking as a result of the development and the impact that this would have on local residents. However, it is considered that redeveloping this land for housing results in benefits which outweigh any harm that the loss of car parking to permit holders within Zone S would cause. The additional submitted material landscape construction details provided with the application are all considered to be acceptable, and this application is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you. We've got a couple of speakers here, and the first one is Councillor Kate Oliver, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to say as a councillor when the development side is that we certainly welcome the development of new affordable housing. My concern I wanted to raise is about the car parking. I appreciate you builders are not allowed to have access to the zone parking, but also I wanted to just put a bit of emphasis on the possibility of having low or no car developments, which is mentioned in the report. I can't find the end of that. And there's
all sorts of other things people can do when they're moving into this new development. Not asking them to change their behaviour, which is what we have asked our existing residents to do, losing some car parking spaces. So where the development will be, there's plenty of access to bus routes, it's very easy. People can walk, cycle, use taxis, there's car park spaces, all sorts. And I feel that having one parking space per dwelling is going to be seen as a disparity. I'm not asking people to bear the brunt of changes equally. I think there's plenty of other things we can do with the space that would be more benefit. For instance, we could use one of the spaces at least for a wild bird garden, a community garden. The residents can have a garden each. I don't think that that's a lovely thing, but it doesn't really particularly promote community cohesion. So it would be nice to have a communal area. The other thing we could do potentially, if there does seem to be plenty of space, is to perhaps make the floor space slightly bigger. I know it meets the minimum requirements, but under DM3, we're speaking of high quality design, I don't really want to just be looking at minimums, in my view. There's mentioned in paragraph 42 in the report, the more verdant character of the surrounding streets cannot be reflected in the new development. And I think that we can mitigate against this by having more natural spaces rather than car parks. We don't want to give people the impression or the understanding that it's essential to have a car to have your own car when you live in the city.
Thank you. We have one other speaker, who's the agent. The agent, great job. You have.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually from Ormond Housing, I'm the applicant. So yeah, my name's Greg Dodds. I'm the Assistant Development Director at Orwell. This site before you today represents the last of a series of small sites we've developed for affordable homes across the city. All of these have been successfully let or sold and are making a positive contribution to the supply of affordable housing. The scheme in front of you today is exactly the same design, which is pre-approved by this committee. The only additional consideration, as your officer pointed out, is the provision of further car parking spaces, providing a further 9 spaces on Beaumont Place for zone S permit holders. This has further relieved the pressure on car parking in the area. So, as your officers have highlighted, unless there are any significant changes in policy, this scheme should be approved and designed. Our progress to build this site out has been delayed somewhat partly by COVID lockdowns and a complicated land deal between Norwich City and Orwell. Those issues have now been resolved and we are seeking permission to renew the consent received. The history of this site is it originally gained planning in January 17 and then later amended in a scheme approved in May 2018. Orwell only actually took ownership of the site in December of last year, although it has been fenced off since August of last year. Following us fencing the site off, there was a legal notice period which took us through to the end of September, allowing for this and serving the necessary party wall notice, which cannot be done until you're a landowner, and going through a tender and procurement period through lockdowns has, as your officers indicated, delayed our appointment of a contractor, their mobilisation and start. But I'm pleased to say now we have a contractor lined up and we're due to start next month and already submitted some of the pre-commencement conditions. The scheme provides 4 new affordable homes for rent and 9 regulated parking spaces to be managed under the traffic regulation order. Our new build programme across Norwich has been funded by Norwich City Council right to buy money and has been very successful working in partnership with your officers. We hope we'll be able to agree to renew the consent to enable us to transform this underused brownfield site into much needed affordable homes. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, move on to questions. Councillor Stu.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just going back to the paragraph 18, where it's the highways, where it references issues on the pedestrian alleyway to Newmarket Road. Can you confirm that this is resolved now and won't create any further delays? Thanks. Shall I ask further questions and then we can come back? The landscape and ecology makes suggestions of additional biodiversity elements. I wonder if these are being considered and is anything additional going to be added as a result of that landscape and ecology report? Can you also confirm that the new parking, the 9 spaces, will be accessible to all Zone S permit holders from across the zone? I have one last question. Yes, residents have made some representations about damage during the construction process. For their benefit and members of the committee, can you describe what action the City Council can and does take when any such damage has taken place, just for the benefit of their peace of mind, please?
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. So the first matter was about the comments about pedestrian access and existing rights of access through the site. That has been resolved. As with the previous proposal, this site layout maintains clear access where there are existing points of access to properties from the site. So those rights of access would be maintained as a result of the proposal. The second query was about biodiversity and whether the recommendations to private enhancements have been incorporated. They have. The landscape details which have been submitted include integrated bat and bird boxes across the site, and the number of those has been increased since first proposed. And also within the soft planting scheme across the site, there have been some improvements made so that that would offer more interest, and that is considered to meet the recommendations of the report. You asked about the 9 spaces on the site that they'd be provided for Zone S permit holders, and yes, that is the intention. And in terms of damage to boundary walls, that's the work around the boundary walls is a matter which would be covered by the Party Wall Act, which is something that the applicant mentioned is one of the negotiations that they've had ongoing, and it is something which the developer is responsible for, and where there's work which affects third-party boundaries, that needs to be negotiated privately with them rather than through the planning process.
Councillor.
Yes, thank you. And actually, on the damage, I think there's concern about damage to curbs and grass verges as well, some of which may be the responsibility of the City Council because it's on the City Council owned property. So again, how we would deal with that. And actually, I have one last question. That's about the proposal mentioned in 5300 transport, the suggestion of creating this as a car-free development rather than the 4 spaces that were previously allocated in the last application. And just have a bit more detail on the discussions that you had about that, how they went, whether it was a suggestion, or a request to have that, and how City Council feel about that as a proposal, please.
Yeah, so in relation to the concern that you raised about construction vehicles and vehicles accessing completed development damaging curbs and verges where there are tight turns and tight roads to access the site. During construction, a construction method statement has been submitted which identifies a clear construction traffic access route for all vehicles to use. That is something which has been incorporated and amended on the advice of the Highway Authority. So vehicles would follow the Highway Authority's recommended route to the site, which is considered to be the safest route and one which is suitable for vehicles associated with the construction. And in terms of any similar issues arising from vehicles using the development once it's occupied, the number of spaces and the number of vehicles accessing the site will be reduced from the current situation. So there's potentially less opportunity for any damage arising from that. In terms of that parking and whether the development could be car-free, There are two relevant policy considerations here. Policy DM32 does identify locations within the city which are appropriate for either low car or car-free development. And this site, given its proximity to bus routes and city centre, is well located for that and would comply with that policy. So it is something which, if it was proposed to us, would comply with policy and be considered acceptable in that respect. The second matter is to consider what has actually been proposed to us in relation to the relevant policies, and that is a proposal which provides one car parking space per new dwelling. That is within accordance with the standards which are set out in Development Management Policy 31. So again, the proposal which is in front of us that proposes one car per dwelling is in accordance with policy and can be considered acceptable on that basis. I have had a conversation with the applicants through their agent about that and about whether they can consider making this car free. They've advised that it's their requirement that each dwelling has one space and that they're proposing that in compliance with policy and wish for the application to be considered on that basis.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Birdwell and then Councillor Lovett.
I was just wondering, especially for the benefit of new councils on planning, and because we've had a similar situation where actually the committee has considered that sort of new issues around traffic and parking should be taken as a new material consideration. So one of the representations says that the data from the parking survey is outdated. Can you just really clearly state for us what exactly, so I mean, so for me it looks like there isn't, that we haven't got anything to go on to actually even assess the application because it has been previously approved. What aspects can we take into consideration? What could have potentially changed that is a material consideration other than the favourable change of the additional car parking? Yeah, could you just clarify that, please?
So the comments which have been received about the accuracy and usefulness of car parking survey data relate to surveys which were undertaken in support of the previous applications that were submitted, which recorded the number of cars within the car park at various different times on different days. The concern locally was that that wasn't representative and didn't show when car parking was at its maximum. What we can consider in determining this application is that the site as existing has capacity for 12 cars to be parked within the existing garages and approximately 29 within spaces at surface level, and they would be lost as a result of the development with 9 of them replaced. As you've identified, the main and in this respect really the only material consideration which has changed is that the car park at Beaumont Place with 9 additional spaces has been made available for Zone S permit holders to use. So when compared to the previous application, that is a favourable change. And in all other respects, the assessment remains the same. It's recognised that there is up to the 29 surface spaces and the 12 garage spaces within the site at the moment, which can all be used at maximum capacity. All but 9 of those would be lost as a result of the development, but there is some additional parking locally now, which provides some mitigation for that.
Yes, I also received emails with regard to safety concerns as the area is used by many pedestrians and cyclists, and concern that when contractors go into the area, will they travel at 20 miles per hour or less and take care of these right-hand bends and such. So could there be a constructor sort of condition put on the application so that the applicant knows that these aren't dangerous situations and that contractors do need to take care The other issue was that where will the construction traffic actually park in this very constricted area?
So the construction method statement, which has been submitted, includes the construction traffic access routes. The Highway Authority consider that to be acceptable and to adequately address the safe access to the site by construction traffic and contractors. And that method statement also makes provision for all construction vehicles to park within the site during that period. And it is considered that that adequately addresses the matters in that respect, which can be considered as part of the planning application. It is possible to also include an informative note recommending that the developer sign up to a considerate contractors scheme, which would reinforce the need for sensitive management of construction and access to the site.
Just to add to that, Chair, construction method statement would be secured by condition 2, and the construction traffic route will be secured by condition 3 as proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Street.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on the question that Councillor Bowman asked about parking, I can confirm that since the car park was closed in August last year, the parking situation has been intolerable for a lot of the residents that park there, and clearly those old, I wasn't involved council when those old readings were taken. I assume that they were accurate at the time, whatever time they were taken. But since then, that car park had been increasingly used by car users in the area. And when I did my own assessment of it before the car park closed, it was in pretty heavy use. And therefore, as a result of that, I think there is a material concern here around parking, or a new material consideration around parking. The parking pressure on the area has been intolerable, and I did work with officers, and my suggestion, amongst others, to create extra parking for Zone S in Beaumont Place. I worked with officers on that to take longer than we hoped it would, but that recently come into place, and it's helping, but it is only 9 spaces, and there are only 9 spaces to come. And I think that's why Councillor Oliver suggested the car-free element of this, and that therefore there is a material consideration there that has been used since the previous application. One of the issues we have parking in the area is that people are taking risks and they're parking on the WNO lines, they're parking on the pavement on the opposite side to where most cars park. And there are dangerous elements to that, and as we all know, obviously getting out parking enforcement is a difficult issue because we don't have enough parking enforcement ultimately. So there is a safety concern there ongoing, and there won't be any different during construction. It will be eased after construction by the new spaces. But I think those additional 4 spaces that are currently allocated would make a big difference, certainly to the people in the area. And so I have a question, which is, can you confirm that we can't condition those 4 spaces to be car-free, or this scheme to be car-free, that therefore that space becomes Zone S, and if we did it, it has to come back as a new application.
No, to answer the question, no, we can't condition that to be the case, and it would need to be an amended proposal if that was something which the applicants wanted to pursue.
Okay, thank you, Councillor John.
I'm sorry to ask a stupid question. It's my first plan. Does the committee bind itself on very similar applications on the same sites, subject to material changes of circumstances?
In general, the committee has to take into account the decisions made, not just by the committee, by the council. So whether a decision is made under delegated powers or made at committee, you cannot ignore a previous decision. You have to have it in mind. The weight that you give to it is a different matter. And if things have changed substantially since that decision was made, then you can, my advice to you is you can come to a different conclusion. But in this instance, our advice to you is that things have not materially changed. I know different opinions have been expressed about that, but the things have not materially changed that would warrant
If things have not materially changed, just to clarify, are we bound by the previous decision?
in essence, yes, you are.
Thank you very much. So I just want to clarify.
Thank you. There's no more questions to the officer. We'll move on to discussion. Before we do that, the recommendation is to approve. And I'll move that. And second,
Microphone. Microphone.
thank you. We'll move on to discussion now. Before we do that, I'll move the recommendation, which is to approve. I'll move that. Seconded, Councillor Button. Thank you. Discussion, anyone? Councillor Stu.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is, for me, it is a difficult one because this is, we're talking about providing much needed social housing. I am disappointed that we can't make this a car-free development, and I think I really hope that the association consider this as a basically being good neighbours to the residents there, because there is going to be an ongoing issue there. But in good conscience, I can't vote against social housing, so I'm going to abstain on this one. Thank you.
Councillor Button.
Thank you, Chair. We've had a lot of discussion about making this car free, and that the tenants who are going to take these four places cannot apply for permanent parking. If they were made car free, would they then be able to apply for a permit? No. No. So they would actually be actually putting their cars somewhere else rather than where they're going to be parked at. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
So, is there a reason why for new developments they can't be eligible for parking permits?
Yeah, it's Norwich City Council's policy.
The policy was adopted when the City Council had the Highways Agency agreement that new builds wouldn't be eligible within controlled parking zones, wouldn't be eligible for new parking permits. And that continues to be the policy that's applied. Now that that's moved, that responsibility has moved back to the county's highways authority.
Councillor Graham.
This is a really prime city centre site, really well connected, great facilities nearby. Having a bungalow and a parking space means that it would meet a very specific need, perhaps for a wheelchair user. So I'm wondering if that, if there's a reason why this site has to have cars on it, then might that reason have something to do with making accessible housing for people who really need to be well situated ground floor? I didn't see that in the report, but perhaps I missed something. Are we talking about providing disability adapted housing, in which case I could live in the car park?
I couldn't really answer that. I mean, these are social houses. Some could come off our council list. So you're not saying if you're disabled or not. You might have people who are more in need than someone who's disabled to take it first. Councillor Bowman?
So for me, it comes down to what we can do. I do not see that there is a material change in the situation. That doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with the original decision that has been made on that site, but that's out of my hands, and therefore, because I don't see a material change, I'll have to vote for it.
Thank you. I want to report as well. I think this is a good scheme for garages which were not used, and that was the reason that the council decided to sell the land for affordable houses. The garages were empty, so the people who had cars were not even putting them in garages, they would leave them on the street and take up the parking spaces in the first place. So the first scheme came through. This is exactly the same as the first scheme, so I don't think we can vote against it. I just hope that now they actually put the diggers in there at the start. I mean, this for 3 years, and I'm not sure who to blame, the constructions or Norwich City Council for holding them up, or court wires or what, but we need these houses in the city to get our homeless off the streets. So I will definitely be voting for this, and that's me, Councillor Stewart.
I just wanted to come back to a point made about the car-free element and not issuing permits to new builds. The idea is to take cars out of the city centre and the reliance on cars. So this looked like an opportunity to me to create a situation where fewer cars were travelling around the city, and especially in this area where there is clearly pressures on parking. It's a missed opportunity. Perhaps it should have come as a car-free development right from the beginning. As I see no material reason to change or to vote against it now in order to change that and delay things further. I think the residents here need to have this built as quickly as possible, and they can access those spaces. And hopefully, if there are still pressures, then we can find some more provision for them locally.
Thank you. Yeah, just Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. On the voting board, the issue to do with car parking, we're a separation from beyond separation from electric, things are all electric, to the car. But this is not really the venue to do. This is not quite right. So that's another meeting, some of the time. On the voting board, we need this functionality.
Thank you. No other councillors wish to speak on those sections of the bill. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
Chair, be recorded votes. So that's Councillor Thomas in favour, Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Button, Councillor Champion, Councillor Graham, Councillor Birdline, Councillor Giles, Councillor Everett, Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Peake, sorry, Councillor Giles.
All those against, please show. Abstentions.
Abstentions, Councillor Stookley.
Thank you. None of those recommendations have been approved. Thank you very much. And we move on to our last one now, which is 4A, which is 5 Guildhall Chamberlain House. And Laura's going to take us through that one. What would you say?
Chair,
Young people leave first.
Can I just say, I have to pick my son up at 1 o'clock. There is no leave there, so I'm hoping, but if I storm out, it's going to happen to me.
Laura's quick, and all will be played or against, we won't be able to follow it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So those of you who were on committee back in February will remember this application and this site. We had a pre-application presentation from the applicant at that point. The proposals for demolition of a retail unit, extensions, conversion and alterations to the existing building to accommodate a hotel and new retail units. So this red line plan here shows that the site runs between Guildhall to the south and Pottergate to the north along Dove Street. The building was originally built as a department store, but it's been extended and modified significantly over the years, especially at its northern end. So that's another red line plan. And then we've got some pictures of the supermarket. So a supermarket occupies most of the ground floor of this building. It's accessed from Guildhall Hill. There's a public entrance on the corner with Dove Street. On to the next photo. So that's the public entrance. And then the next photo shows some doors that are currently used as a secondary public entrance and a staff entrance with stairs leading up to a first floor staff room. On to the next, we've got a view down Dove Street. So this is looking up towards a gable, which is not sort of built to be an external wall. The ground floor is occupied by a number of small retail units, and the upper floors are vacant offices. On this view here, you can see the low retail units on the corner there, which are sort of more modern extensions. And you can see a silver maple tree within the highway in the foreground there. Next photo shows the sort of condition of the planter that the tree is in. That's clearly broken out of that planter. Then you've got the service yard here, which is accessed from Pottergate. It's a large service yard which services the supermarket. And the next photo shows a panorama. Also, we've got one more photo of the service yard with a nice mural. And yes, this panorama shows the context. So you've got the corner with Lobster Lane on the left-hand side and Dove Street. Then you've got the tree and the low retail units, the service yard in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the gable end of number 6 Pottergate, which is a Grade 2 listed building. And we've got a photo just showing that junction there between the site and the side of that building. The extensions that I'll show you in a minute extend up to that boundary. This is a view taken from within the existing building, so you can see the rear of number 6 Pottergates in this photo. And this is a photo looking in the opposite direction, so you can see the site just in the distance there. That's the existing building. The proposals would fill that gap in, so you'd see much more of the building in this view. This is the proposed development. The scheme retains the primary building, including a small supermarket and 4 of the 5 small retail units along Dove Street. The 20th century extension, which houses the northernmost retail units, to be demolished, and the development builds over the service yard to provide additional commercial space. The extension stands at 5 stories tall, including a mezzanine, and the buildings to be used for a 91-bedroom hotel and 2 small retail units. An on-street loading bay is to be provided to service the hotel and the supermarket, along with some public realm works around the tree. To facilitate the development, the highway tree is to be pruned, and the applicant has offered to pay for the ongoing maintenance of it for 20 years. So we'll go on to see some visualizations of the proposal. So we've got a 3D view here. As you can see, the ground floor is proposed to be treated with green glazed brick, and the floors above red brick. And then the upper floor are set back, treated with metal shingles. The area on the Pottergate elevation, if we go on to the next one, yeah, that one there, you can see an area of the Pottergate elevation which is designated for artwork. It's proposed that a local artist is commissioned to provide a permanent piece of artwork there. So we'll show the floor plans. I'm not going to go into detail about every inch of space, and you can't see it anyway, but essentially this is the basement, which is servicing for the hotel and the supermarket. Onto the next one, we've got the supermarket in light blue there, retail units in green, and on the right hand side and the left hand side you can see various entrances to the hotel space in this sort of teal colour. Then this is mezzanine. Because of the land levels, only some of the site has a floor at this level, but there's additional retail and hotel space. And then the first, second and third floor will all look quite similar, with hotel rooms, and yes, there's a restaurant there on the first floor for the hotel, but only for guests at the hotel. And then on the top floor, you'll see that there's a sort of there's an existing part of the building which extends higher than the rest of it, and that's to be used for plant. And then if we look at the Dove Street elevation, There's been a particular challenge along this elevation with the shop fronts, one of the shop fronts having to be retained. Yes, that one there. So it has to be built over. The way that the applicant has dealt with this is to extend the metal from the roof down to meet the shop fronts. It's a bit of an interesting design choice, but we feel it's acceptable. We'll see the Postgate elevation. This is where the majority of the extensions can be seen, and you can see that the height is at 5 stories, but with the setback, it wouldn't view as such from ground level. Guildhall elevation, we've got this is the entrance to the hotel on the left-hand side. Another challenge of the development has been the location of lifts behind the leftmost windows. So that row of windows would be blacked out because there'd be lifts immediately behind. We've pushed the applicant on each of these points, but due to the constraints of the site, it's not been possible to do anything else, and overall we feel that that's acceptable. Then we've got the courtyard elevations. Again, these have been slightly modified over the course of the application, just to add a little bit more interest, because as we saw from the rear of the properties on Postgate, you would see this view. So there's been a little bit of interest added to those views, just to make it a little bit less bland than it was when it first came in. The street elevations, so you can see here that the site is surrounded by developments of a similar height, and we feel that it's a fairly prominent corner location, and something of this height is considered acceptable. Go on to the next slide. We've got the landscaping plan. So we've got the loading bay shown just there. It's been carefully designed in liaison with the Highway Authority over the course of the pre-app. This removes the need for lorries to reverse within the street, and therefore the safety risk to pedestrians and cyclists is reduced. It's anticipated that the hotel and supermarket will only need around 2 to 3 deliveries per day between them, but to avoid the risk of more than one lorry arriving at any one time, a delivery management plan is to be agreed. The majority of other vehicular traffic is much smaller in size and generally goes straight down Lobster Lane, so we're comfortable that there shouldn't be an issue with lorries passing should that loading bay be occupied. There's potential to have some seating around the tree outside the cafe, if that unit were to be used as a cafe, that is. So then we've got a plan showing works to the tree. So you can see the spread of the crown on the left-hand side there, and the areas hatched in orange are to be pruned in order to facilitate the development. In discussion with the tree officer, it's been agreed that the remainder of the tree would also be pruned, which is necessary for it anyway. It hasn't been pruned for a long time, but also would even up the visual appearance of it. And then I think we've got a 3D view there, yeah. So we've received 4 objections to this scheme. They raise concerns about the logistics of the proposed service bay, and raise concerns about the impact of the proposed hotel and retail units on the success of the surrounding local independent retailers. Overall, as officers, we consider that the proposal offers a sustainably located hotel and new retail units which would enhance the vitality and viability of the shopping area and the wider city centre. The proposed redevelopment makes efficient use of the site, and the reuse of existing buildings is supported by local and national policy due to the sustainability benefits. The extensions would make a positive contribution to the street scene, and the works to the public realm and the highway tree would offer further enhancements. The recommendation is therefore to approve the application with the conditions listed in the committee report and subject to a legal agreement which would secure funds for the ongoing maintenance of the tree.
Thank you for that. Move on to questions. I've just got one. Who owns the tree?
Norfolk County Council.
And was that the highways? Was it swap on that? So that was ours?
That's right, yes. So it was ours before the highway agreement switched back to Norfolk County Council now own that.
20 years' time, that'll be put back to whoever's in charge of highways.
So the idea isn't that the applicant would own the tree, it's simply that they would pay for the ongoing maintenance of it for 20 years.
Okay. So can you actually do something with the tree? Let's see.
So it should actually be noted that the tree is has a TPO on it as of last year.
Okay, Councillor Graham, did you want a question?
I believe that Lobster Lane is traffic free at the moment. So I can see why a large lorry would want to go down Lobster Lane rather than turning left or reversing. Does that mean that Lobster Lane will no longer be traffic free, or do those delivery lorries get a special dispensation, or how does it work?
Lobster Lane isn't traffic free. You might not see anything go down it very often because it's only deliveries and things.
It has no entry sign, so I'm thinking about that.
Well, the vehicles can go down Lobster Lane.
I was going to say I'll be down there, but I better not, just in case. Anyone else? Okay, let's see any questions. So, question, Councillor Stewart?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, regarding highways, there's a list of considerations that have been addressed there, but there's nothing there that I can see about guest drop-offs, and I've got concerns about where people will be dropped off for this hotel, because obviously there's no parking, and there is a local car park, but it's often from especially busy times when they expect this hotel to be busy also. So is there anything in there about drop-offs?
Yes, so it's worth pointing out that the hotel entrance is on Guildhall Hill, to the left of the supermarket, which is very close to the taxi rank. So that was the deliberate choice that that it would be very close to an area which could be used for guest drop-off. Okay,
and with recent highways changes, there's no access now to Essex Street, and that is likely to become permanent. So where are guests going to be dropped off at this hotel?
So,
Essex Street, that's miles away.
I beg your pardon, Exchange Street.
That was going to be my question. I'll let you do that. So we have talked about this scheme with one of my colleagues who's dealing with the works to the Norwich Lanes traffic system, and he is comfortable that there would be somewhere close by. So I can't go into the details at this point, but it is understood that the future plans would be okay for it.
Okay, thank you. Can I come back? Yeah, apologies, Essex Street is another headache altogether. Can I ask about the paragraph 27, and that is proposed works to the trees. Care will need to be taken when working around the trees so as not to disturb roots. Is there a method in place to detect where those roots are going to be? And before you answer that, I've got one more question, so if I may. That is about the architecture. When we had a presentation on this, I mentioned that I had an office there. I was lucky enough to have an office there about 10 years ago. And it was a fabulous place to work. And clearly there are going to be some hidden gems behind some of the modern additions, roofing and walls that will be revealed. I just wondered if you've had any detailed discussions yet about archaeological discoveries and features within the building as well to be retained.
So first, on your first question, we have received an arboricultural method statement which sets out how the works around the tree would be carried out and how roots would be protected during that. The applicant's required to carry out those works with supervision from an arborist as well, which would ensure that those works were being carried out as expected. It's difficult for us to control internal works because it's not a listed building. So yes, while we encourage the sort of revealing of any sort of historic features that are discovered, it's not something we can require in this case.
Councillor?
Apologies, I have one more question. In the upper floor of this building, there are it's an area where birds get in and spend time nesting. Has there been any investigation as to whether this is also a place where bats reside?
Yes, yes, no bats were found on 3 surveys, and the applicant's required to submit details of bird boxes, which would include starlings, pied wagtails, and swifts.
Thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Menzel.
Chair, just occurs to me that they've got a little public house as an outdoor license. Would that have to be revoked?
So the proposed use is as a hotel, so guests wouldn't have the same protection as residential dwellings would. So if guests of a hotel are getting a 4 night's sleep, that's not something that we're going to necessarily.
I was thinking it takes up most of the space because it's very narrow.
She's talking about the pub on the other side, have a seat outside, which is great.
I can't see that there'd be any impact from this proposal on that.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? I mean, it's possible that things like that might be temporarily affected during construction.
Yeah.
But once it's back in development, there's no reason why they shouldn't have tables and chairs licenses. Yeah, so there may be some temporary disruption to what's going on the streets at the moment during construction, but
Mr. Stephen?
Yeah, actually, Councillor Maxwell makes a very good point about this, because the pavement licence, the temporary pavement licence that they have at the Vine is on both sides of the street, I believe, and with the permission of the shop tenant opposite. And I'm not entirely sure of the details of this one, because it did get complicated. And there was an agreement put in place, but there is some additional seating there, and this venue will clearly be significantly affected by this. It's a small venue anyway that needs that outside space. So I suppose the question is whether we can condition some kind of compensation.
I think the short answer is you can't, because those licenses are temporary and can be revoked at any time. And if access is needed for the legitimate use of the highway, then the legitimate use of the highway takes precedent over a license. So, but I mean, bear in mind that the life of the consent goes over 3 years. So by the time the applicant has prepared all the submission of conditions and things like that, then in terms of COVID and the need for that venue to have outside seating, hopefully, fingers crossed, that will have passed. So the impact upon them, they'll hopefully be able to go back and use their premises as they previously did. So I think any impact that we're talking about is very, very, very short term.
Yes, thank you, Neil. So I think from the point of view of the venue, I think their concept was to have a long-term outside space, which is what most venues are looking at the moment. And I think they applied for a temporary licence, and that's actually been extended until next September. But it is likely that there will be a variation to a lot of these licence applications that would extend that. So there is some concern actually about how this venue will be affected.
Okay, we'll move on to discussions, but before we do that, the recommendation is to approve. I'll move that. Seconded, Councillor Button, thank you. Discussions, anyone? Who, Councillor Champion, please.
So I was looking at the recommendations and also, bird boxes, what have you. I was just wondering if any consideration had been put into solar panels or other energy, renewable energy in the premises.
Yeah, so the applicant submitted a energy statement with the application. It comes to the conclusion that air source heat pumps are the best thing for this site specifically, and it's understood that those air source heat pumps would provide 17% of the energy requirement for the hotel.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes, and I think this it does look like a good development in planning terms. Obviously, it depends at the operator and we'll have to make it a success. But I was curious to see that objections came from the Norwich Lanes, because I think I would hope that this will provide a steady stream of regular new customers for them. So hopefully their fears will not come to fruition. On the whole, I think this is a good scheme for the city, and I'm voting in favour.
Okay, yeah, I think this is a good scheme. Talking about the wine, I have to say it about the restaurant and the bar and the hotel. A little bit too big premises, which would suit them quite fine, I would have thought. But I think it's an ideal situation. It's in a city centre, drop-off points you talk about here. I can remember when the coaches used to come down, they used to drop off at City Hall. And I know all the market traders for like that to happen again, because that big small public into the centre and stuff like that was dropped the routes off. So I believe there is enough rooms and network where they're to drop it, or probably if you're just dropping someone off at the hotel, you're not probably there more than or something like that. But there might be some work out where you can actually have a proper parking along there, but that's a different subject completely. But I think the hotel will be good. That seemed to me, I'm not sure how many rooms were there, 200?
91.
91 rooms, so you talk about 200 people roughly in the hotel. It's more for the economy in the city centre at no times, more vibrant, nothing else ideal. Anyone else? Councillor Bergman?
Yeah, I think I'm mostly looking forward to the estate actually being improved, because that drop off point there at the moment is not very, it just disrupts a really nice lane, so it disrupts the lanes quite significantly. So I'm hoping that will actually, as to the benefit of the traders, and will improve the overall look of the lanes in that end.
Thank you. Is no one else wishes to speak? We move to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation to approve, please show. That's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. And that's the end of the planning meeting.